And so we find here that this is the first instance of a king in Israel, but not a king that God has commissioned. And that's why when somebody, you may have questioned it and said, I thought Saul was the first king. Well, yes, Saul was the first king that was commissioned by God, because the Israelites said, we need a king. And God said, all right, but he will be a thorn in your side. And of course, as you know, with Saul and David, he was. So Jotham then, the youngest son of Gideon, kind of pulls a bit of a fast one. He goes into a local pub and he says to the people there that he says this little parable, and it's a neat parable because what he does is he says all the trees, basically the people in Shechem, are trees, and he says that the trees want somebody to rule over them. So they go to the fig tree, who bears good fruit, sweetness and good things for humanity. They go to the vine, which provides grapes, which is good wine for humanity. You see, they approach these things that the olive branch, which obviously provides olive oil, which was almost basically a currency at the time because of its value. All these things that that Jotham uses to say that they approach these things, and the trees approach these types of plants that are in the public eye doing public service. And that is basically saying that they approached Gideon, who had a good service, did good things for the public, but denied ruling over them, because the idea is that perhaps if I become king, I will lose my sweetness of fruit. And I would rather serve in the public eye than become slothful in it. So that's basically Jotham's parable. And he says that eventually the trees are without anything to rule over them, and so they go to the bramble. And why the bramble, you ask, instead of, say, the cedar, the mighty cedars of Lebanon, or the pine? Well, the reason why that is because, quite simply, what good is a tree unless it's cut down and burned in that time? So they go to these public things that are continually giving good fruit because they've proven themselves. And then they go to the brambles, being, of course, Abimelech. And the brambles have no positive value at all. In fact, brambles are one of the things that chokes out the good seed in the parable of the sower in the New Testament. So you get the same feeling here, that they go to brambles because they don't have anybody else to go to, and the bramble says, take shade in me? Well, brambles overtake things and kill things. Interesting. A very good parable. So then Jotham basically stirs the pot, blows some wind onto the coals, and ignites a fire in this guy named Gaul. And then just fades away. I kind of think of that Simpsons episode where Homer says, all in favor? Everyone puts up their hand, aye! All opposed? And you hear this tiny little geeky voice in the background going, me. And then eventually, after a few times this happens, he says, Homer says, who keeps saying that? And then it zooms to the back of the room, and there's this little geeky guy with his hat, and this giant guy with his arms crossed, and he's just, muscular and stuff. And then the guy with the geeky hat says, "It was him. Let's get him, fellas." And then everybody beats up the big hulky guy before he can even defend himself. So that's kind of the same thing here. He fans the fire, and then he just kind of fades off into oblivion, and we don't really hear from him again. So Jotham does this, and it's interesting that Gaul is another bramble. If you read the text carefully, you find out that Gaul brings together people, and as God puts this spirit of evil hate between the people of Shechem and Abimelech, another bramble comes forth in Gaul. And so Gaul, when brambles fight brambles, no good can happen but cutting one another and bringing each other down, which is exactly God's desire. Interesting. So then Gaul basically lines up his people in waiting for Abimelech. When Abimelech comes out, he calls him out. Abimelech routs him very, very quickly, kills all of the people that are all the people that were making this little coup that was happening, burns down a tower, burns down a city with 1,000 men, and the reason why it says women and children as well is to say that even those people who are weak enough just to follow are considered to be guilty for the sins of the people they are following. So it is true that if we follow a corrupt government willingly and don't do anything about it, then we are as guilty as they are in the things that they're doing. So then Abimelech completely destroys the city, and then seeds salt in it. Basically, when you salt the dirt, nothing can grow. Now we do find later on in 1 Kings chapter 12 that isn't the case, and so that's more or less what happens here. Now, once again, Abimelech does decide that he's going to take the steps further. And so he pushes on more and approaches a tower. And sure enough, in that tower, a woman takes a millstone and drops it and crushes his skull. And you would think that this would be an opportunity for him to redeem himself before God. But instead of that, all he cares about is his own credit, that he was going to be killed by a woman. It's interesting that that's the case, because certainly it seems awkward that you would think, why would he rather suit his own purposes in having good credit, even in death, to not be killed by a woman and having his slave kill him, instead of actually redeeming himself in front of and potentially helping himself before God? But he doesn't do that. And sure enough, as Gaul was destroyed, and the Shechemites were as well, and Abimelech and his band of scallywags were destroyed, now all of a sudden we find in the last verse in Judges, God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father in killing his 70 brothers, and again killing. Interesting that he was killed with the same stone that his 70 brothers were, and you read earlier that he put them to stone. Interesting. Anyway, God returned all of the wickedness of the men of Shechem on their own heads, and the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal, Gideon, came upon them. So I kind of reminded like that Seinfeld episode, Even Steven, where everything just kind of ends up the same. Jerry gives away a $20 bill, somehow or another he gets a $20 bill back, and the entire episode is about that. That's kind of the same thing that happens here. All's well that ends well. God has made sure that his theocracy reigns in the book of Judges. Somebody comes up in trying to make themselves king and succeeds for 3 years, and then God breaks him down, and he is destroyed with the same vehicle that he destroyed the sons of Gideon with. And so all good things come to an end, and all bad things do as well. So it's an interesting chapter, and I often think, as I'm reading this, how does this apply to me? So as I was reading this, I was thinking about all the things that we try to do under our own strength and our own power. And as we look through this chapter, and we see that even though Abimelech had the means, he had the backing of the people, albeit a backdoor way of doing it, a bit shady, a lot shady. He reigns for 3 years, so you would think that maybe God would just wipe him out right away. Well, God, in 3 years, potentially just gave him the ability to recant and repent and make things right, but incidentally he doesn't. So after 3 years, punishment doesn't come right away. And so when we do these things in these ministry, we might see quick fruits. Just again, alluding back to the parable of the sower, how the seeds that fall on shallow soil spring up quickly, get tall and quickly, and then get burnt in the sun. So same kind of thing here, that the opportunity is there. He took the opportunity, he did it negatively, he shot up quickly, but he also died quickly. And so unless things are consulted to God, and even though Saul was consulted with God, bad things came from it later on, because God said, you don't need a king, but God allowed for a king, and good has come from it. But again, the first step happened that they consulted God. Abimelech didn't even do that, and of course to his own demise. So think about that as you walk your daily life. Are there things that you're doing under your own strength and not leaving up to God? I know in my life that there are things that I don't fully submit to Him, and I'm continuing to work on that on a daily basis, submitting things to God, allowing Him to reign in every aspect in my life. And as I continue on in my life, I pray and hope that as I surrender more and more, that I will decrease and God will increase, just as John the Baptist says in John. So think about that, and I look forward to seeing you next week for Judges chapter 10, and we take a look at a little bit more oppression between the Philistines and the Ammonites. So look forward to seeing you then. Take care. God bless.